Hello, and welcome back to our second guest speaker session of the day. I'm joined here today with Dr. Katie Welch, an educational consultant who provides professional development to language educators through partnerships with institutions like the U.S. Department of State and Cambridge University Press. So thank you so much for being here today, Katie. We're
Thank
really
you
excited
for
to have
having
you.
me. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here, Lise.
Awesome. Okay, Katie, the stage is yours.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I want to tell you as I'm pulling up my presentation that I am going to be drinking today out of my Ellii mug. And let me show it to you in just a second. And so I'm really excited to be back with Ellii. I was here last year as a presenter at this conference and really enjoyed it. And so I'm thrilled to be back with you talking about a similar topic from last time, but a little bit different. Last year, I talked about social emotional learning in the classroom. And this year, we're going to talk, instead of focusing out to the students and our classroom setting, we're going to turn the focus inward and look at ourselves for a minute. And so we'll be looking at self-care 101, addressing teachers' social and emotional needs. And you may be looking at these emojis right now and thinking, oh, I found myself. Before we get going, though, I want to tell you a little bit about myself, how I come to this work. So my name is Katie, and I have a PhD in linguistics. So I love languages, but I also, along the way, getting that PhD, I took a bunch of graduate courses in counseling. And so ultimately, I kind of landed in the TESOL world, the ESL world. And so I'm really excited today to be talking with teachers of English learners about well-being and social emotional needs, because it's really a combination of a lot of the different parts of my background. So I just a couple of other facts about me. I serve on the executive board of TexTESOL 5. I'm down here in Dallas, Texas. If my accent gave me away, I'm a Texan, and I have served as president and currently serving as treasurer of that organization. Love being involved in the TESOL world. I'm a teacher. I have taught in many different contexts over the years, including higher education and adult education and K-12. And so hopefully, wherever you teach, whoever you're teaching, hopefully we'll talk today about something that's relevant to your context, since I've worked in a lot of different areas over my career. Currently, I am teaching this very week. I teach as a volunteer in a GED program in my local community. It's one of the best parts of my week. So I work in adult education just as a volunteer, as I know many of you are probably in volunteer programs. And then also professionally, I'm teaching right now at a university, working with international graduate students who are trying to become teaching assistants and are needing some support with their public speaking skills. So working at two very different environments, but enjoy all of it. So I am a teacher, but also a teacher trainer. I have spent most of my career coming alongside teachers and helping prepare them for language classrooms. So that's a little bit about me. As part of my teacher training, I participated in a project that was specifically about teacher well-being, where we were looking at this issue of how do we help support teachers in very difficult circumstances. So I'm hoping that we can give you some good ideas today. But before we get started, I want to know how you're feeling. How are you doing today? And how's the school year going? I don't know if you work by quarter or by semester or school year, but I'm just curious, how are things? And so we're going to switch to a Menti real quick. And so if you have your phone, you can grab your phone and just pull up a browser and type in Menti, MENTI.com, and there's a code, and you will see some emojis, and you can just click on the one that looks like how you feel like your school year is going, and that will tell us kind of how you're coming. So I'm going to switch over to the Menti screen so we can see see how we're doing. Here it is. I see a couple of people. You've got to look, but there's little blue dots, and the blue dots show me where people are clicking. And so far I've got 3 folks here who are feeling the heart emoji, which is wonderful. Hopefully that means you're having a good school year so far. Ooh, I see a couple here in the, you know, sometimes people call this the cringe emoji. So maybe you're feeling a little cringy. You got some cool sunglasses. A couple of people who are kind of looking a little stressed. That's okay. We've got kind of some side eyes coming in. Uh-oh, got someone down here in the smiling poop emoji. I don't know how to interpret that. I don't know what that means, but I think we've all been there. We've all been there. So great. I love seeing all of these responses coming in. If you want to participate, you can go to menti.com, and then the code is 88092913. We'll give this just a couple more minutes. Looks like we got a few more. So it sounds like we're identifying some. I see a couple of people are giving that kind of straight face, this one here. Or maybe it's not going great, but it's not going terrible. You're kind of in the middle. Maybe it's just been a wacky and wild year for you. That happens. That happens more frequently than I'd like to admit. And we've got a couple that are kind of feeling sad about the year. And if you're coming into this space feeling like this is a rough year, you are not alone. You are not alone at all. And hopefully we can give you some ideas today about how we can address some of the stress that you're feeling and the weight and responsibility of being a teacher in 2022. Okay, well, I'm just going to give it probably about 10 more seconds to let you participate. And then I'm going to actually move on to one more question that I want while you're there on your phone. I'm just going to change the slide. Looks like this is a good news. Nobody did the angry face. So maybe that's a good thing. And no one's giving me the sleepy face. So I guess that's good as well. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next slide now. And the question is just, who do you work with? I told you that I work right now both in adult education and also in higher education. I have spent a lot of my career training K-12 teachers and have been a K-12 teacher as well. But where do you currently teach? We've got all these little balls letting us know. And Menti, by the way, I love using Menti just because it's such a fun thing. And you saw how easy it was to get in. So you can create these for your own students if this is a software that you are thinking, oh, I'd like to try that. Looks like we've got quite a few in adult education, quite a few in K-12, and then some other. Obviously, these are kind of broad categories, so may not be yours. Okay, I'm going to give that just a couple more minutes and continue to share, but I'm going to switch my screen back over to my slides. So thank you so much for letting me know a little bit more about you and how you are feeling about the year. So let's talk a little bit about social emotional learning. If you happened to come to the conference last year and were in this session, then this would be familiar to you because this is what we talked about last year. Social emotional learning is becoming quite the buzzword in education, and it's abbreviated SEL. So it's nice and confusing. You have ESL and SEL. And when we talk about social emotional learning, it doesn't just apply to children, although you usually see it talked about in K-12. It's also for adults. And there's 5 pieces to it. The official definition is that it's the process through which children and adults acquire and effectively apply knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions. So people managing their emotions, that's self-awareness. Set and achieve positive goals, that's self-management. feel and show empathy for others, is social awareness. Establish and maintain positive relationships, relationship skills, and then making responsible decisions is obviously responsible decision making. And so this is social emotional learning. And this is if you're wanting to develop these skills in your students, there are many ways that you can bring this into focus. And that's really what I looked at last year is how do you bring this into focus in an ESL classroom? If you're interested in that aspect of social emotional well-being, then feel free to check out on the Ellii website. There is an entire uh, collection that's dedicated to these topics. And so you would just go to materials and then down to collections. And then you would scroll down to the academic subjects area. It's the one with the calculator and the microscope. And then right there, the first one is social emotional learning. And so there's an entire collection around these topics. And you'll notice when you scroll that you're going to find the 5 things I just mentioned: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, decision making. And so you can sort by each of these. And just as an example for self-management, the first one that comes up is a blog post. And so even if you are not a subscriber to Ellii, you have access to the blog. And there's a blog here about practicing mindfulness in the classroom. So if you're interested in classroom applications of SEL, then this is a great resource for you. But today, we are going to instead be thinking about, instead of classroom applications, we're thinking more about personal applications of SEL, social emotional learning or social emotional wellness. So I liked this picture. I mean, I didn't like it, but this picture spoke to me, I think is probably a better way to say it. When I saw this woman and thought about being a teacher in 2022, I can just imagine she's just opened her laptop and she has gotten some email from somebody, maybe an administrator, letting her know about some new task that she's needing to take on. Maybe she just saw something from a parent if she's teaching in K-12. Oh my goodness, what am I going to do? Hopefully she's not looking at test scores, but she could be. Maybe she's looking at the news, right? And thinking, oh gosh, because what a time to be a teacher. It's always been a difficult profession, but because of the pandemic and because of all of the political turmoil that's going on, because of all of the challenges going on in our world today, it's an even more difficult time to be a teacher. Here are some recent headlines, most of these from within the past week or month. Just to read a few of them, the U.S. has 300,000 teacher school staff vacancies, the National Education Agency president says. Certainly I'm based in the U.S., we see these teacher shortages being talked about a lot in the news. But if we look elsewhere in the world, we see teacher shortages, a common problem throughout Europe's schools. We see also in a Canadian publication, there's concern about a shortage of substitute teachers. This one, I'm in Texas, so this one was interesting to me, says what Texas's educator shortage looks like for one pre-K teacher. Last school year, Michelle Cardenas was tasked with teaching 2 pre-K classes at the same time. She's dreading what is to come this year. And so it is a very difficult time to be a teacher. And then we have this last one, trust in teachers is plunging amid a culture war in education. So we see teaching and education entering into our political spaces, entering into kind of national narratives. And it's just a pervasive part of our life right now. And so it's hard to be a teacher in 2022. It's always been hard, but it's especially hard right now. When we think about teaching English learners, we have some additional unique challenges. So not only do we have the backdrop of COVID, and not only the backdrop of all of this turmoil that's going on in our um, in the world around us, but also just the fact that we work with an English learner population can mean that it's a challenging road. Depending on who you teach, again, there's many different places where you can teach English learners, but depending on which population you serve, you very well could be working with refugees. You could be working with undocumented immigrants who have experienced a lot of trauma in their own lives. And, when they don't leave their trauma at the door when they walk into your classroom, that comes with them. And that's something you have to, as a teacher, figure out how to manage an additional concern that you have in your teaching. Generally speaking, there's usually higher teacher turnover in schools with greater poverty. And so, you think about a refugee population, undocumented immigrants are often going to be experiencing poverty. And so, in those schools or in those contexts where you're teaching, you have a lot of instability because teachers are getting burnt out and leaving. In the US, for example, it said that the attrition rate, so the rates that teachers leave, is about 50% higher in those contexts. And so it makes for a difficult environment if you are teaching in 2022 with an English learner population. And so this means that we, as teachers of English learners, are going to be more vulnerable to feelings of helplessness and burnout and compassion fatigue and possibly even secondary trauma. Now, each of those four things are different. Feelings of helplessness, obviously, just feeling like I don't have the resources to deal with these issues. Burnout is when you have kind of this prolonged sense of discouragement and frustration in your job. Compassion fatigue is the point where you have been so compassionate and so caring that you get desensitized to it and you no longer can experience empathy. And then secondary trauma is when the stories of your students actually kind of traumatize you as well. So there's a lot of things that we are more vulnerable to. Doesn't mean they have to happen to you, just means we're more vulnerable. I want to share a personal story. I, several years ago, was working with this population that would, undocumented immigrants, high poverty area. And I want to tell you about a specific day, a very difficult day for me. I had been asked, I was supposed to teach in that day, and I did. I was teaching a night class, but I had been asked to come in the morning, knowing that I was going to teach until late in the evening. And those of you who teach professionally know sometimes in your contract it says other duties as assigned, which means, you teach and then you do a bunch of other random stuff and service obligations. And sometimes that's really where it takes a toll. And so on this particular day, I've been asked to come in and conduct a bunch of interviews with students. And all day long, I was listening to student stories and listening to the very traumatic experiences that they had had. I had one student who I was working with who was living with a very unsupportive partner. She was pregnant herself, and she was very depressed. Her hygiene was not great because of her depression. She didn't have access to health care for her baby, and she was cutting herself. And so I was talking with this student. We were trying to figure out, she was struggling in the program. We were trying to figure out how to help her succeed in academically with all of these challenges that she was bringing. I then taught my class, and was done at about 9 o'clock. And I had a student in class who was just very clear that she was having a very rough day. And so she came to talk to me afterwards and shared with me that there had been a suicide in her son's school that day, and that it was a close friend of her son, and he was now suicidal. And so just, I mean, heavy, heavy things. And I wasn't sure that the mom was even doing that well. And so that was a day in the life of teaching the English learner population. It takes a toll on the educator as well. It took a toll on me, and I entered into a season of burnout. And so I'm coming to you today as someone who has been through it. So if you're coming today with the sad face or the frowny face, or you're feeling like, I don't know if I can keep going, I've been there for sure. And so obviously the solution to that, all of that I just said, was for me to go home and take a bubble bath and squeaky squeaky with my rubber ducky, and it would all go away, right? It'd all be better. Right? Of course not. Of course not. But so often when we think about self-care and I say, okay, we need self-care for teachers, a lot of the ideas that are thrown around involve bubble baths and massages and breathing exercises. And and that is, I love a good bubble bath. Like, these are not bad things at all. But the challenge is that those are not sufficient solutions for the types of issues that we're facing in our classrooms. And so there's the elephant in the classroom. This is an idiom that people use, the elephant in the room. Some in the chat, if you happen to know what elephant in the room, what is that? If you say the elephant in the room, what does that mean? Does anybody know? The Ellii. Oh, because it's Ellii. I love it. Anybody? I'm seeing some great conversations in the chat and people talking about kind of their experience. Yeah, okay. Peg said, an issue everyone knows about, but no one, oh, I lost it. No one talks about, wants to address or talk about. That's exactly right. Thank you for sharing that. And several of the rest of you said, yep, the big thing no one will talk about. Everyone knows what it is, but no one will talk about it. The elephant in the classroom, or the elephant in the room, is that a lot of times when we talk about self-care for teachers, it feels very dismissive. It feels like, especially if these suggestions are coming from an administrator or coming from someone who has control over some of your environment, and they could actually make some changes that would positively help you, and they say, well, just go, get a massage. You feel like your concerns are being dismissed. And the truth is, the issues that we have in education are enormous. The enormity of the problem is it can be so overwhelming. And so the elephant in the classroom is that when we talk about self-care, that we have to be careful that we're not just throwing a Band-Aid on a much, much bigger problem. I want to talk for a minute about mindfulness and about breathing exercises, because so often this is one of the ideas that is given. And in fact, last year when I presented at the conference, we talked about how beneficial breathing exercises are. And so I don't want to dismiss the research that is around the benefits of breathing exercises. And so if someone has suggested to you, have you tried yoga, or do you do mindfulness, or just take a deep breath? There is some truth to that, right? There is some truth, because we spend so much of our lives in fight or flight mode, right? So much of our lives in fight or flight mode. And when we stop and take a breath, we are sending a message to our brain that says, calm down. It's okay. You don't have to fight or flight. You can rest and digest. That's what it's called, rest and digest. In fact, the deep breathing helps a lot if you have tummy troubles, if you have issues in your gut, because your gut is very sensitive to that stress. And so there's a lot of value in breathing. Um, I have over here if it'll play for me, just an inhale and then an exhale. And this is just a graphic that, you can use, that if you, as it's going up, inhale, exhale. And usually the exhale is longer, because on that exhale, that's you're telling your body, it's okay, we're safe, calm down. And so there's a lot of good things that happen in these types of breathing exercises. But I think what it reminds me of is, in college, I took a class called Relaxation and Fitness. I took an entire class called Relaxation and Fitness for a grade. And this class was basically, in essence, by the way, feel free to breathe along with my GIF as I'm telling you this story. But in this college class, it was a little bit of yoga, a little bit of mindfulness, and about 30 minutes of napping. Literally, we took a 30-minute nap every day in this class. Now, I am a high achieving, kind of a type A person. And so I would be in this class and it was nap time. I was literally getting a grade for napping. And I would be thinking, I have so much to do. This is a waste of time. I need to be doing all of these things that I have going on. And then I started thinking, oh my gosh, I can't sleep. I'm going to fail nap time. I'm going to fail this class because I can't relax. And so all the while, the hamster in my mind was spinning, 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 spinning. And so I was supposed to be relaxing and breathing, and yet I couldn't mentally even get there because I felt so overwhelmed by everything else that I had going on. And so even though we know that these breathing exercises work, I think when a lot of teachers come to this idea, they're kind of like I was in college, where they're like, okay, I'll breathe. But as you're breathing, you're thinking, I have so much to do. How is this helping? And so instead, while this is a good practice, today we're going to focus on some other solutions. And the way we're going to frame our discussion today is, how can we have agency? How can we feel like we have control over what's going on in our world? Because we can feel we're doing those breathing exercises, and the whole time we're thinking the world is on fire. We're in fight or flight. And so we're going to frame our conversation through this circle of control. A lot of times as teachers, we feel like there are so many things that are outside of our control. And there are many things that are outside of our control. But we're starting to see this exercise, this kind of framework, be used in multiple contexts. It's used in counseling and coaching. It's also used in the K-12 classroom. This would be a great exercise for your students, actually. So you can either just draw a circle on the board and a bigger circle around it, or you can get like a hula hoop I've seen people do. But the idea is to think about, okay, there are things in my life that are outside of my control. I can't control natural disasters. I can't control other people's feelings, right? Like that's kind of on them. I can't control traffic. I wish I could, but I can't. I can't control what people think about me. We can't control viruses. I mean, there are obviously ways to address them, but COVID coming along, we couldn't, that was something out of our control. I can't control the weather. It's out of my control. But there are some things that I do have control over in my life. And this, again, was one that was made with children. But how you treat others, who you play with, what you watch, your actions, and what you say. Over here on the right is a teacher's circle of control. So these might be more meaningful to you. But within that circle of control, we have how I talk to myself is something I have control over. How other people talk to me, I don't have a lot of control over that, but I can certainly have control over how I talk to myself. How I respond to challenging students. I can't control the fact that I have challenging students, but I can control how I respond to them. And so for me, when I started, going into burnout, and I was thinking, these issues that my students are dealing with are so heavy, and I'm just one person, and what can I do? And I saw myself slipping into burnout. This was something that was very helpful for me. Was saying, okay, what are some things that I cannot control? Well, some things that were outside of my control in my story that I told you. One was my students' home life. I didn't have any control over their home life, but I do have control over educating myself about resources that were available to these students. So I couldn't, the students that were dealing with all these mental health issues, they were dealing with unsupportive partners. I can't change those things, but I could find out, okay, well, are there resources available for these students, and what are they? That particular day that I was telling you about, I had been asked to schedule meetings back to back to back to back. And I could have said no, but I said yes. And I said yes. And I knew I was going to be teaching late that night. And I knew that I was going to teach first thing the next morning. And I said yes to all of those things. And so I couldn't control that they asked me, but I could have either said no, or I could have said, okay, yes, but could we change the time? Because on that particular day, I didn't eat. I didn't stop to eat dinner or lunch. I didn't stop to rest. And that was something that it was a mistake that I made looking back, is that I should have taken control over my own schedule. Now, not all teachers have control over their schedule. And the thing is, in your context, the things that are outside of your control and the things that are inside of your control may look different than for me. As in teaching in higher education, I have a lot of control over my curriculum and my instruction. I get to choose a lot of what I teach. You may be given a curriculum, and so that's something that's outside of your control. But you may have the instruction, how you teach that curriculum may be within your control. Or how you may be given a grading policy that you have to implement. That's outside of your control. But inside of your control, maybe you can control how many things you're grading or how you go about grading. And so I'm going to encourage you, as an exercise, if you're feeling overwhelmed, draw a circle. And start thinking, what are some things that I can control in this situation? Because it gives you a sense of agency. It gives you a sense of, this is not all just overwhelming. The world is not all on fire. Okay, so we're going to start here. Now, we're not going to end here because we do want to talk about those issues that are happening out in the world. But we want to stop the bleeding, right? And the way that you stop the bleeding is you focus on, what can I control? So the theme today of our conference is simplicity. And when I learned that, I thought, oh gosh, this is not a simple topic. This is a very complex topic. But I wanted to come up with some simple concepts that we can apply that will help us as we kind of think about what is something I can control in my classroom. And also, so often when we talk about teacher self-care, we have all these experts coming in who have never actually been teachers. And so they don't know what it's like. And so we are going to be using examples today from actual teachers. I have the great advantage of, because I was working in a school of education over many years, about 10 years, and I taught about 100 students a semester. So I had the chance to work with a lot of students, and many of them are still out there, practicing in their classrooms. Some have left, but many are still out there. And we have a Facebook group where we keep up with all the alumni, and we asked them this past year, what has helped you to stay? What has helped you to be able to find joy in the work that you're doing in the past few years? In 2022, what are your self-care strategies? And so these are things that actual teachers who are still in the classroom say, this is how I did it. So we're going to work with first setting boundaries, and second is we're going to streamline, and the third is we're going to celebrate. So those are the ones we're going to talk through. Okay, so the first one is setting boundaries. And this one, this could be an entire talk in and of itself. So I'm just going to give the highlights and then some resources you might look into. When we talk about setting boundaries, um, as an example, when COVID started, a lot of us started teaching online. And I had taught online for about 10 years. And so the online part wasn't new to me. But something I know is true, and many of us have learned over the past few years, is when you teach online, there is this idea that you are now available to your students 24/7, because you may have students who are working on an assignment, and even if you're teaching face to face and students are working on homework or something, they may have a question at 11 o'clock at night. You may have another student who is working at first thing in the morning, and so it can feel like that we have to work round the clock as like constant tech support. And that is a very quick way to burn out, right? Is when you never have a break and you feel, or even if you're, sitting at home watching TV with your family, something like that. And then, oh, now I've got to turn my attention back to work. And so it feels like you're always on. And so the way that we address that is we have to set boundaries around our time. And there are a number of ways that you can do this. I'm just thinking in the past 3 days, I have had to email two teachers. I have two kids. And so I had to email a teacher for each child. And last night, the teacher had said, please send me a picture of this activity. And so I, did at 9 o'clock at night. And at 9:15, I got a message back from her. Oh, and I thought, that could have waited until tomorrow. And same thing. I emailed a teacher on Saturday night. She got back to me 8:15 on a Saturday night. And this is very normal for teachers. And so we have to find a way to manage that. It's not sustainable. And so one easy suggestion is to turn notifications off. That is, think about what you're being notified about. And there's always a setting somewhere where you can say, please send me less of this. Right now, I'm trying to do something with my graduate students where I have a doodle poll. A doodle poll is like a poll where you're trying to figure out when people are available. And I've got these busy graduate students and we're trying to find a time to meet. And every time I see a notification with this doodle poll, I can feel my blood pressure just rising. And so I decided, you know what? I have already scheduled into my week 30 minutes to address this issue, the doodle poll issue. I'm going to do that later. But I was getting emails about, notifications about this doodle poll every 10 minutes yesterday. And so I just went into Doodle and said, please don't email me. I will come to you when I'm ready to address this problem. And so I encourage you, that's an easy boundary that you can set. It's just less notifications. You can also manage expectations about your availability. You don't have to be available 24/7. And so you can establish some kind of office hours. Many teachers say that this is helpful to them, where they say, I will be available at these times. I was talking to a colleague this week who had gotten a bunch of emails over the weekend, and she just set up an autoresponder that said, I am not working on Saturday or Sunday, but I will get back with you on Sunday night at 6 p.m. So await a response at that time. And so that's her saying, I acknowledge that you need something, and I will get back with you at this particular time, so she could protect her weekend. Something I use pretty often is schedule send. Most email clients have the ability for you to schedule emails. And so if you're using Outlook, and so a lot of times if I'm thinking, okay, I want to go ahead and get this done, but I don't want to start a conversation with this person at night because this is something that can wait till tomorrow, but I just want to go ahead and send off this quick email. I will just schedule send for 8 o'clock the next morning. So that way they will get that email, and it's basically, I'm saying, this is a tomorrow thing. And so I encourage you to look into that. Also, many of those students, in fact, I would say almost all of them, my students, my former students who are out there in the world teaching somewhere, we say, how do you stay? They said, I had to become comfortable saying no. I think as teachers, we always want to say yes, but we need to be careful about our yeses. So become comfortable finding things that you can say no to. And what those are depends on your context. And then, so many of my students, what they said, and I mean, and my students, but also other teachers that I've heard from around the world have said the thing that saved my teaching career was being willing to make a change in my teaching context. It was setting a boundary to say, I'm not going to work in a toxic environment. And so they moved schools, they moved positions, and they are so happy now and have found a place where they can say no, and they can have boundaries and balance. And so that's not a decision that you take lightly. That's certainly something you want to talk about with your trusted mentors in your life. But many of my students reported that that was the thing that helped. That was the boundary they needed to set. So that's one example of boundaries. Another, I thought this was a very innovative idea from a teacher on Twitter who again was talking about this. And she said, your students do not need a personalized response to their email about an assignment at 11 p.m. Save your sanity, set up an autoresponder in your email with answers to common questions, update weekly. And this person, she just had it wasn't just, hey, I'll get back to you on Sunday. It was like, hey, I'm unavailable. I will get back to you within the next 48 hours. But here's 3 things that students usually email me about. And so it was, I don't understand what to do. And so she kind of re-explained it there. I need more time on an assignment. She said, great, here's the link to the extension request. I finished work that you already graded. Can you update my grade? And she says, I do that on Wednesdays. Here's the link where you can go ask, let me know that there's something pending that I need to grade. And so she was saving herself having to send all of those emails by setting up this autoresponder. So this is, again, a good example of how we can set boundaries in our classrooms. Okay, second thing is streamline. We want to work smarter, not harder. So streamlining, the example I just gave was a good example of streamlining, where not only was she setting boundaries, but she also had these links, these Google forms that students could go fill out. And an extension request was one that I mentioned. It's, as a general rule, great to automate or delegate anywhere you can, because the amount of things teachers have to remember and do in a day is unbelievable. And so anywhere where, kind of the same, where they talk about the president of the United States often wears the same clothes every day because it's one less decision to make. Anything you can automate like that is going to reduce your cognitive load, and hopefully increase your well-being. So if you notice that you're doing the same process over and over again, you can create a template or a cheat sheet. Something I did in one of my classes is I noticed that I was constantly giving feedback every semester, like typing long feedback to writing assignments. And the feedback was always pretty similar across students. And so I started copying and pasting my feedback into a Google Doc. And I just kept that Google Doc. And from semester to semester, I could just go copy and paste, and then just adjust as I needed. And then I started adding in, it was a team that taught that same content. And so we all started sharing that document, and then we would add our comments. And so then we had a pretty good bank of writing feedback that we could just go and copy and paste. And so it reduced the amount of workload from semester to semester on all of us. When we talk about streamlining, I don't want to leave the impression that we're going to sacrifice compassion or care for our students. Going back to my example about, I had these students who were really dealing with difficult issues. They needed resources, outside resources, mental health resources, physical resources like healthcare. And so I started adding in an extension request for students anytime they needed extra time on an assignment. And that extension request looked like this. It says, why are you unable to meet the assignment deadline? And it had different options: family responsibilities, challenges with time management, illness. I use kind of elevated vocabulary here, but of course, with English learners, you could use I feel sick or something like that, depending on the level that you're teaching. But if they chose, for example, family responsibilities, before they actually submitted, it sent them to a page that said, hey, I want to make you aware that your well-being is important to me. If you're struggling with school life balance, because of course students struggle with these things too, I want to let you know there's 10 free counseling sessions available through our university, and here is how you can make an appointment. And so I was sending them to the resource that they needed. If they said that they were sick, I let them know, hey, I want to make sure you know that we have a clinic on campus, and this is where you can go for that. And so this was a way to, again, help provide the resources that they need without completely depleting my time in the process. And so it's a way to automate and also continue to be compassionate towards the needs of my students. One other way to streamline is just to not reinvent the wheel. I love to make my own curriculum. I love to come up with new and creative ideas, but there's just not always time for that. And so, it's great to share resources with experienced teachers. Also, just Ellii, who obviously is our host today, has some wonderful pre-made resources that are just plug and play. They're so easy to use. And so, and they have, again, these ones that are centered around social emotional learning. So these are just some examples of, there's one on burnout. This is like a lesson plan about burnout. So you could teach your students about what burnout is, and you're not having to come up with this information. So it's a way to give the information to your students, but you can also learn in the process, right? If you're interested in learning more about burnout, or you're thinking, maybe I'm burnt out. We know we always learn best when we teach it. So we could go ahead and say, hey, I'm going to do a lesson on this, and I'm going to learn about burnout in the process. So, don't reinvent the wheel. Use things that are already available. And last thing, a resource here that I want to recommend to you, if you're like, I want to know more about that, is Angela Watson has a podcast called Truth for Teachers. And in this podcast, it is all about how to streamline your classroom. And so if you go to this podcast and look for this, just Google Truth for Teachers, you'll see that this week, the 3-day weekend mindset, I would be very interested in knowing about that, because I think a lot of times for teachers, it's a 0-day weekend mindset. Letting go of all or nothing thinking. 3 ways to create teaching templates that will save you 5 to 10 minutes. So lots of great practical advice here. And see, she says, save yourself huge amounts of time by reusing your own work. And so if you want to learn more, these are great, like 15-minute podcasts you can listen to on your way to work, in the car when you have some free time. And this is a free resource. Angela Watson has a paid resource, a paid program called the 40-Hour Teacher Work Week, because it's so rare to have teachers that are able to get all their work done in a typical 40-hour work week, that she's actually created a whole program around this, but this is her free resource. So I encourage you to take a look at that. Okay, and then our third step is going to be to celebrate. And what I mean by celebrate is to celebrate the small wins that you have as a teacher, and to also celebrate the big wins. So much of our teaching a lot of times is dependent on the ultimate outcome of our students, how they do on a standardized test, whether they're able to move up to the next level. But if we kind of attach our self-worth as a teacher to those big things, we're probably setting ourselves up for disappointment. And so instead, I'm going to encourage you to celebrate kind of the small wins that you have. So many teachers say that one of the things that keeps them going is having some sort of a collection of reminders of why they teach, or reminders of good times that they've had in their classroom. And so this teacher says, when I tell you this binder has gotten me through the toughest of days, this isn't an exaggeration. If you don't have a Why I Teach binder, you need to make one. And so you may be in a context where you have children giving you lots of little notes where you can make a Why I Teach binder. If you're teaching adults, You may not have that. This far picture on the right over here is a picture of my office that I'm in right now. And those are just some different notes from students, from coworkers, from colleagues that were given to me over the years that, when I'm needing a little bit of a pick-me-up, it's a great way just to remember kind of the wins that I've had over the year in education. If you are thinking, ugh, this doesn't sound like the kind of thing I would want to do. Something that got me through my toughest burnout days was actually just saying the names of my students and picturing their faces as I would drive to class. Because just saying their names, just picturing their faces would help me recenter as to, okay, I'm not, all these other things that I'm worried about, they're not the focus. The focus is these individual lives that I work with. Also, just celebrating small wins. I use a journal I'm not advocating that you use this journal, but what I like about this journal is that every day I have to answer the question, how can I win the day? How can I win the day? And originally when I started, I would think, well, I can win the day if so-and-so emails me back, or I can win the day if my, this person treats me well. I can't control those things, right? Those are outside of my circle of control. And so what I realized was, to win the day, I have to stay within my circle of control. So focus on the small wins that you have. All right, we're going to wrap up our time thinking again about the circle of control. When we think about the circle of control, this is a concept that was popularized by Stephen Covey. And he actually, what I showed you is simplified. The real model looks like this. There's a circle of control, there's a circle of influence, and then there's a circle of concern. And so that circle of control is things you have direct control over. But that circle of influence is a place where you can exert your influence and hopefully enact some kind of change to your environment. Now, if you're in the midst of burnout, the circle of influence is not the place to start. You want to start what are the things I can control? How can I set boundaries? How can I streamline? How can I celebrate the things that are going well? But once you get to a place of wellness, once you get to a place where you don't feel like just the world is on fire, then as you start to think about your circle of influence, you can think about, I don't like the curriculum that's being given to me. That's outside of my control, but I could serve on a committee, the curriculum committee, and exert some influence there. You might think, I don't like that my administrator is asking me to do all of these things. That's something outside of your control, is what's being asked of you. But in your influences, maybe voicing those concerns. That's something you can have influence over. You may not like what's going on in your government related to education right now. That's outside of your control. But in your circle of influences, you can vote. That's something that you can do. Or you can participate in the political process. You can email representatives about education issues. If you have the capacity, you can mentor new teachers. Again, not if you're in crisis mode, but if you have the capacity. And you can ultimately advocate for change. And so the idea here with self-care is not to just go, put on your mask, put in your earbuds, get in your bubble bath and tune out the world and pretend like there are no issues out there. The idea is to try to set some boundaries, to streamline your work, to really try to take control over your environment. And then when you get to that place where you feel like, okay, this is a little bit more manageable, then you can move into that circle of influence. And as you start influencing your environment, the hope is that those concerns, those things that are so overwhelming, become less overwhelming. So I'm hoping that perhaps throughout this talk, you've gotten some ideas about how you can go from I can't do it, it's too much, it's too hard, to maybe an I can do it. I can take some small steps that can help me get through the day. And then hopefully you can get to a place where you can move from just crisis mode to stop the bleeding to a place of advocacy where you can influence your world, your little corner of the world, wherever it is, for your students, for yourself, for your colleagues, and for all of us. So thank you for the work that you do. It is so important. And I want to leave a couple of minutes here at the end for some questions or ideas or comments that you have. So leaving space for all of that. Let's see. I was going to invite Lise to come back and see if she had any questions for us.
That's right. I'm here. And there are a few questions. Hopefully we can get to one or two of these. So Katie, if you wanted to stop sharing your screen, then I can show some of these questions.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. That was a really, really engaging presentation.
Wonderful. I hope it was helpful. That's the goal. Is we, it is hard to be a teacher, and we have to think of practical solutions. So
Definitely. Definitely. You shared a ton. So thank you for that. Here's one question. It's, I'm just recovering from a burnout. Do you have any tips for teachers to avoid this? I feel like it's difficult for self-employed teachers to find the balance between work and self-care.
yeah. Um, that's a great question. I think, yeah, that's the goal. Is not the ideal is not to have to go through the burnout and have all of these lessons learned and then be like, I need to really change some of the things that I'm doing. Instead, the goal would be to just prevent a burnout in the first place. And I think you're right. I find myself going back to these patterns of, even just silly things like not taking time to eat, or over scheduling myself, or just feeling like, oh, I got an email from a student. They need an answer right now. And so I find myself kind of going back into these patterns. I am certainly not the epitome of self-care. I'm learning how to do it like everyone else. I think the key is in self-reflection, though. I think it's taking the time to reflect on what are the things, what are my tendencies, what are my patterns, what are the places where I start to feel overwhelmed, and then using that reflection piece to then make a plan for change and say, well, that's definitely where I need to build in a boundary, or that's definitely where I need to streamline. It is very hard for me with my doodle poll yesterday when I was getting all of those emails. I wanted so badly to go and figure out that problem right then, because that's just kind of my nature. But I had to tell myself, if I do that now, I'm saying yes to that problem, but no to some other things that I already have planned. And so instead, I just need to tell myself, I have already planned to address this issue, and I'm going to do that at a later date, and I'm going to stick to the plan that I have. And so I think part of it is just being honest with yourself about what your struggles are, and then notice your emotions. If you're feeling angry, it's okay to feel angry. If someone's saying, "Hey, try mindfulness," and your response is, "How dare you? You don't understand what's going on in my world." If you get an anger kind of reaction with things like that, that's okay, but it's a clue about what's going on inside of you. And so I would say the other part of it is like pay attention to what you're feeling and use those as clues, to as a point. Hey, I may be approaching burnout, and I need to make a change.
Ellii,